feel like I haven't had enough time to listen to people because I've been in the legislature listening to other politicians and, and lobbyists. I've gotten to listen to a lot of lobbyists. You'd be impressed with how many lobbyists there are down at the Capitol every day, and they're not very shy about talking to you. And you can, walk out trying to look as hurried as you can, and somehow they'll manage to get in your pathway and get your attention for a few minutes. And one of my frustrations is that when something comes up, I don't get to talk to just everyday citizens about what do you think about this. And in fact, I remember, some of you may know Jeff Hart. He's a precinct committee person from this area. I called Jeff Hart up one time, and I think I ran this case, I call it a case because that's how you talk about things in medicine, this bill by Owen as well. Because one of the interesting things about being in politics is you find out what things or in the state government, you find out what things state government has control over that you had no idea they had control over. And then, more scary, you find out what things you have absolutely no control over that you thought you did. But anyway, so one of the interesting things is that it's, somewhat regulated by state law, who gets to have a taxi cab or not. How many people knew that? That taxi cabs are regulated by state law. It's through the Public Utilities Commission. And in order to go out and be a taxi cab driver, you need to apply to this commission to get a taxi cab. And so there was this law that came up about, should we let people have as many taxi cabs as they want if they meet the standard? Or should we regulate how many taxi cabs can be on the road? And so I talked with a lot of people about it. And it was interesting to talk with everyday people about this and get their opinion, because there are a lot of people who work particularly in tourism in the city and county of Denver who are concerned that if we have too many taxi cabs out there, or if they're not nice enough, that will reflect badly on our city. And so they really didn't want us to let more people have taxi cabs. Which was interesting because I'm not very much of a, I always tease that I don't know very much about the market, but I know more than I think I do. But I said it just seems sort of like a monopoly to say you can't do that business or you can do that business. Like, would we say you can't be a hairdresser because we have enough hairdressers, or you can't be a school teacher, and it might not give you a job, you might not make any money at it, but you're welcome to try it. And what was most interesting to me actually was sitting there listening to the testimony of people who came in to testify. And as you can imagine, the people who were against this bill were people who were already taxi drivers. And the people who were for the bill were people who would have liked to become a taxi driver. But actually, one of them was a company that had a lawsuit last year to become taxi drivers. I don't know if any of you read that wonderful news magazine, Westward. I saw it in there, I have to admit. It was Union Taxi. They're the bright orange taxis that are out there. And there was this one gentleman who came up there, and he just so moved me because he was an immigrant from somewhere in Africa. And he talked about how this had been his American dream, and about how pleased he was when he got his license with Union Taxi. And the people who didn't want more taxi drivers said, there isn't enough business, we can't hardly make it, how are we going to pay our bills? And this guy said, but you know what I'm doing? I write everybody's name down, I call them by their name, I call them once a week and ask them if they need any more help. I have a marketing plan, and he showed us his book and who he had transferred from where and how he keeps in contact with his customers. And he had really just completely, innovated and done a business design around this. And it was really interesting and moving to hear this person who had, clearly learned about our country and how things are done in America and just come in here and done it. And then there were some ugly things that you would hear as well, where people would say, well, it's really hard for tourists to come in and have someone in and not be able to understand the way they speak. I thought, oh, that doesn't, that's not a good thing to say to me, at least. But it was one of those just fascinating things to learn about. So I'm going to actually try and work with people around that regulation of taxi cab businesses this summer. And it's actually considered a little bit of a Republican thing, but I think it's good to sort of, if you think something is right or wrong, to help fix it and not worry about whether it's labeled, Republican or Democrat, but worry about it just from a person's point of view, a person trying to come here and make a living in something that they feel passionate about for whatever reason that might be, as long as you're not endangering the public, obviously. But, so that was one of my interesting stories from the session. Does anyone have any questions for me? Aaron?
I just wanted to say something to what you were just saying. It was a Republican thing in the Senate where Senator Harvey was carrying the bill. Representative Kagan carried it in the House. Please do talk to him if you want to talk on the subject, because I know
I told him that we might be doing something about it.
He spent a lot of time looking into this issue, so
great.
It'd be a good resource.
Elliot, did you have
Wasn't there something suspect about some of the proceedings on that? Because there was somebody who couldn't get a license, and then the PUC granted somebody who already existed another 150 licenses?
Exactly. Yeah, and there's some information that, and Carol probably would know this more than I would because I've not had a chance to look into it, but that actually Yellow Cab in Denver is owned by an international corporation. One of the other interesting things, based in France, one of the other interesting things that came out in testimony was that Yellow Cab charges their taxi drivers a lot more for their taxi per week than Union Cab does. And so, of course, those drivers don't want more competition out there because it's hard for them to make their rental fee and make their living out of their money. And it was a dramatic difference, like 200 versus 600 a week. I mean, a lot of money difference. And so it felt a little bit like we were enabling, you know, people to be taken advantage of. It was quite interesting to listen to it, not knowing anything about it, you know, not already having been biased about it.
Is this some kind of New Jersey connection to the Yellow Cab?
I don't know. I know, but that sounds funny.
Sure.
No, I'm kidding. You know, the other thing that was really interesting to learn about was auto dealers. You know, these guys who are auto dealers, they actually have to sign contracts with the manufacturers, like GM or Nissan or Toyota, that hold them to certain standards. And the manufacturer can literally say, we're changing our colors to purple. You need to redesign your whole auto lot or we won't give you any more cars. And then they have to do it. And when auto dealers buy cars, once they bought them, they're theirs, whether they sell them or not. And so it's just a really interesting business practice. And I thought, well, no wonder those poor auto dealers are so aggressive, you know. But as I was sitting there, I thought, you know, that's an interesting idea that was great in the 1960s when people drove around looking for cars. But how do most people find a car today? Amazon. Well, not Amazon, but you know, literally we go onto the internet and we look and see who's got the best price, and then you sort of do a lot of it before you ever get there, and then you go and pick up the car. And I said, you know, how many people actually come in and say, oh, I stopped at your shop because of the pretty colors? You know, I don't think that's how we make those decisions anymore. So it's interesting to learn about that as well. But any questions for anyone, or anything you just want to say or ask? Yes. And tell me your name again, because I'm trying to get better at learning names.
Oh, good luck. Karen Miller.
Okay.
I'm interested in, other than, I know that if I go out on the internet, I can get to the Senate, you know, actively in session, folks actively in session and follow what's going on. But that requires being able to have an internet connection. I know that if I want to see something having to do with the local government, with the city and county government, when I had Comcast, I could go out to Channel 8, but you have to have Comcast to get out and see that. You know, now that I've switched, I don't have access to the local broadcasting. What is in the, and also, you know, as far as the federal government, we can go out on cable and we can see what's happening in those houses. What happens on the state level? Where would a, you know, regular citizen go out and turn the TV on and be able to watch, you know, what is going on? So that, I mean, I think I'm undereducated. I mean, I know I'm undereducated as far as the whole political process or the whole government process. So I would like to know more about that. I mean, you know, you've been very good about your forums and as far as educating the public. Well, where can we go? Is there a place? Is that available to everyone?
All of the hearings in all the rooms are broadcast, but on the internet, if I'm remembering correctly. And then, but the Senate floor and the House floor are also on television. I don't remember the station right now, but they're on public television. So you could watch the proceedings on the floor of the House. It's like 59 or 65. I'll try and find out, and we'll maybe...
It's the Colorado channel.
Colorado channel.
Yeah.
65.
165.
So you can watch it on that station.
And the reason I think it's important because we have one newspaper in this town now. And you mentioned Westward, for better or for worse, it is the other newspaper in town. Then Denver Daily's gone out and what have you. So I don't like to hear filtered information. I want to hear what is being said from the legislative standpoint. What are you saying when you're standing there talking to your constituents? And the newspaper and some of the local stations filter it based on what they want to tell their constituents. So that's why it's important to me to be able to hear right from those people that are actively involved.
And although it's not something I'd recommend every day unless you have trouble sleeping, I think it would be interesting to watch sometimes to get a sense of how different people are and what their opinions are like and what they feel passionately about. And unfortunately, depending on the day and what bill is being discussed, you'll hear more or less than on other times. You probably get a better sense from listening a little bit to hearings, where you also get to hear public testimony. But there's, there are stereotypes that exist because unfortunately they're real. Like we had a hearing. Anyone that the governor appoints to executive office gets approved by the Senate. And so they would come to committees if it was related to your committee, and you'd interview them, and most of the time you just approve who the governor had chosen. But during the interview process, I remember for Dr. Chris Irvine, who actually happens to live in Senate District 32, he was going to be head of the Department of Public Health and Environment. And literally 2 people on the panel spent the whole time trying to get to whether or not he believed that CO2 was creating, pollution problems in our ozone or not. Now, if you know the Department of Public Health and Environment, it does a lot of things. It does air, it does water, it does food safety, it does, immunizations and disease prevention. But that was the only thing, and they just kept peppering him and trying to change the question and ask again and again and again. And he obviously had been prepped by somebody because in the end, I don't think he ever gave them the answer they wanted to hear. But it was sort of interesting because you hear those stereotype things coming out in hearings as people ask questions, and you get a sense of where their bias is at and where they're coming from. And I just find that interesting because as you're trying to work with people, it's good to know where their lines are, so that you know how you might try and work with them and reach them in some strategic way. But yeah, so that one TV channel, and otherwise you're stuck with the internet. Yes.
Do you have any